this morning. If you will, open your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6 will be the first place we look here in a few moments. One good thing about it having a little bit less light all the time is that the sunrise is now finally at a time where I can appreciate it. Any earlier than I don't have a whole lot of appreciation for things that happened before about 5:30 in the morning. But got up, got the dog out this morning, and I peeked over the trees, and I saw that there was pink on the horizon. I ran back inside, told Brittany I had to go grab my camera and run down to the lake, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful sunrise this morning. Really appreciate getting to spend the morning like that. I was mentioning to Brittany and a couple other people, it's been a year ago today that we've been traveling over to Richmond, and I know that that's put a little bit extra strain on our times for Sunday morning and some extra restraints for our time throughout the week, and I appreciate you guys being so supportive of us getting to go over there and do as much as we can. It's been a blessing to get to do that, and I really appreciate the love and the help that we've had in that work. This morning we want to begin by addressing the children, so all the kids want to perk up for a couple minutes and then fall back asleep later on. But growing up is difficult. It's tremendously hard. There is much to be learned about life and many skills to be acquired. There's a whole maze of social situations to work yourself through, not only going to school and then going through all your social activities. And then you have to get good grades and find someone to marry, and all that stuff has to go into it. I don't know hardly any adults who wish to go back to that period of life. Once you get past that, I think everyone's kind of like finally, we're past that. Never again do I want to enter that stage of life. Now, that being said, it seems like these times are destined to be tremendously hard on both children and parents and families in general. A lot of tumult. I know that as our kids are nearing that age, we all have that nail-biting experience of what are these ages going to be like. And I think the Bible lays out a plan where those ages don't have to be nearly as hard as we expect them to be, or we destine them to be. And a lot of that revolves around verses 1 and verse 2 here in Ephesians chapter 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, for this is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land. This is the key to making the transition from childhood to adulthood smoother than the world would have it to be. I'm not saying it's going to be automatically smooth, but this is the beginning of that process. And it begins there in verse 2, to honor your father and mother. That's the topic for this morning, is what it means to honor your parents. How does that look in your life? Honor simply means holding someone in high esteem or in high regard. It is valuing them, the role that they play in your life, and the effort that they put into it. It is showing respect, indifference. It's shown in obedience and kindness. And the growing up years are times where those ideas seem to fly out of our minds the quickest. At young children, I think they automatically kind of learn to love their parents, and they look up to them and they hold them in high regard. And there's a few years that I don't know what happens to our brains, but we just simply want to forget about those ideas. And we don't hold them in high regard anymore. And that idea of respect and esteem and lifting them up kind of goes out of our mind. Turn with me to Proverbs chapter 23. We'll look at a couple passages here in the book of Proverbs. But I would like to tell the kids that the happiness of the household, there's an old saying, a happy wife, happy life. Not always true by any means. Children, how you act as you grow up, the respect that you show towards your parents has a lot to do with the happiness that you have and the happiness that your family has as well. And this isn't me saying, well, this is a good time for you to start making everyone else miserable. Not what I'm saying at all. Here in Proverbs chapter 23, there in verse 24, Solomon says, the father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. A couple pages back into Proverbs chapter 10, Proverbs chapter 10, there in verse 1, Solomon says, the proverb of Solomon, a wise son makes his father glad, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. And a couple pages further down into chapter 17 and in verse 25. Proverbs 17 and in verse 25, Solomon again says, "A foolish son is a grief to his father and a bitterness to him who bore him." I think that sometimes we as parents are anticipating those years because we realize the reality of what Solomon says. That you children, as you grow up, you have a lot to do with the happiness of your parents. We as children often fail to see that we cause much of the strife. Maybe one thing we all have in common, male, female, young or old, we are all here children of parents. That's one thing we all have in common. And that's why Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1, 2, and 3 are so important to all of us. Maybe looking back at your childhood, you realize maybe you caused a lot of the strife that you blamed on your parents at those ages. We can avoid most of that by simply being wise and really trying to apply the principles of Ephesians chapter 6 and trying to honor our parents at whatever age that we're at. God's commands are always right. We should hold our parents in high regard. We should esteem them. We should care for them and respect them at whatever age we are. God has placed them in our lives in that role for a purpose. And because God has given them that role, we should honor them in that. On an unrelated matter, and David has been anointed king, but he hasn't taken the throne yet. And when God tells him that Saul will no longer be king, and David's going to be king in his place, David still holds Saul in high regard continually, knowing that he is not a good king, knowing that he's going to take his place, because God has placed him in that position. He said, "How can I raise my hand against the Lord's anointed?" God has chosen your parents and placed them in your life for the role that they have, and you should honor them regardless if they're good parents or not. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. If you turn over to Proverbs chapter 22, and Dennis came up before services and asked me if I had a scripture reading. I mentioned Ephesians chapter 6. He goes, "That's what I was going to read anyways." And so then he read Proverbs chapter 22 there in verse 6. "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it." As children, you cannot know what you don't know. As children, it's hard to imagine what the world is going to be like and how much your parents really do understand and know and experience and plan for you. One of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, he famously said, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around me. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned over the last 7 years." We as children often fail to understand just how much our parents understand and know. And for the children who are here and kind of questioning whether or not your parents are wise or smart, the answer is yes, especially compared to you, in a nice way. As children, we believe that we are more knowledgeable than we are, and we believe our parents to be less knowledgeable than they are. Your parents are at least more than twice your age. They have had all the similar experiences that you're currently having, and then more so. They have acquired knowledge not only from their own experiences, but their own study. And more than that, they have gained experience from other individuals that they have gone to for wisdom and instruction and help and guidance along the way. And even if you don't currently feel that your parents are wise or smart, there will be a day when you begin to realize just how wise and smart they are. And so at your age, whatever your age is now, it's important for you to honor them and to humbly realize that even though you don't understand how wise and smart they are now, we should respect them and care for them and listen to them now in expectation of understanding why later. But beyond their experience and beyond their wisdom collecting and in their insight, the fact is that your parents love you. And in loving you, they are trying their very best to have you avoid all the problems that they made, and it was many of them. I know me as a father, I'm constantly having that on my mind of how can I raise them the most? How can I instruct them the best in God's instruction? And wanting the very best for my children, I don't want them to fail in any way. And I give them instructions along the way that I don't expect them to understand at this age. I teach them to do things now that they don't understand in hopes that when they do understand, it's because they've avoided the problems that I made. Take advantage of the knowledge and the wisdom that's coupled along with the love that your parents have for you. Don't disregard that for a moment. Sometimes because as children we fail to see the outcome that our parents are planning. We try our hardest to avoid the things that they want us to do. And the exact opposite is true. The whole point of Ephesians chapter 6 is because our parents have an outcome waiting for us. They have a goal in mind for us. We should honor and respect them now so we can get to where they want us to be. It's no wonder that God has designed the family as He has. Two loving parents who are there to guide and instruct the child at a young age when they do not know, so that when they are old enough, they have come up in discipline, in that instruction. It's a beautiful structure, and we as children play a large role in that. There's a couple ways that we can demonstrate that in our lives. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 4, 1 Timothy chapter 4, the first way I would suggest to you that we can honor our parents is honor them with our lips. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, there in verse 12, Paul's writing to Timothy not specifically in regards to parents, but just in general how we should conduct ourselves. He says, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and in conduct, in love and faith and purity." The way that we speak to and about somebody, the word choices that we make and the tone of voice that we use is very telling about how you feel about somebody. It's easy when struggles arise and conflicts happen in the family and feelings are hurt that irreverent tone taints all the things that we say. Insolent is sometimes the phrase we think of when we think of some children. It's that tone of voice, it's the words that we use. We allow irreverence to come in and disrespect, to ruin all of our communications between us and our parents. And yet we are instructed, Paul's instructing Timothy, to be an example in speech. Our parents hold a place of authority in our lives, and God has placed them in that position. He has given them the right and the role to correct us when we are wrong. He has giving them the mental responsibility to teach us and to instruct us. We need to honor that in the way that we speak about them. One of my best friends in college, he grew up just a couple blocks from college. When he was young, his mother died, his father remarried to someone who most people would consider a rather harsh person. And he paid the full room and board expense at college in order to get some freedom and to be away from that situation. One day, he got a phone call from his mom that she had found out that he went over to an older member's at church house and helped him lay down sod in the yard. And she was angry that he had taken time from his schoolwork to go and help somebody else, and grounded him from college to go back home and stay in his old bedroom, wake up on Saturday morning, eat breakfast with the family, as to teach him not to do that. And you think, well, to me, that just seemed the most irrational thing that Daniel, or the young man who's unnamed, was doing exactly what you would expect a good, earnest Christian to do, to go and help somebody out from church. And at a college age, to be grounded to go back home, how hard would that have been? And yet, Daniel, the unnamed man, don't care about this story, never once said anything bad about his mother. Never used an irreverent tone. He told us he had to go home. He told us why he had to go home. Never once did disrespect ever come across his lips. Never did he ever tell me anything in a disrespectful manner about his mom. That's huge. That is absolutely huge. It tells me scores about his father. It tells me scores about him as an individual and the love and care that he had for his mother, even when other people would view her as being unreasonable. That is a fantastic example of what it means to honor someone with your lips. To hold them in a high regard, that even when they're not present, and even when they're doing things that you don't understand or agree with, that you still speak of them respectfully. And Ephesians chapter 6, there in verse 1 and verse 2, to honor your mother and your father. That is the key to that, or a key to that. The next one is found in there in verse 1 and verse 2. He couples these two ideas together in verse 2 to honor your father and mother, and he couples that with children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. We honor our parents by being obedient. As we strive for independence and we work on maturing, our desire and our parents' wish do not always match up. What we want as kids and what our parents expect from us don't go together. In fact, they often are polar opposites. Parents often are accused of not understanding what it's like to be a child, or maybe not caring what the results of their edicts or their commands or their rules have on their child's life. Conflicts happen, and two opposing wills collide, and many fights and shouting matches ensue. And the question comes up, well, who's going to win? In Ephesians chapter 6, in verse 1 and verse 2, does not say if your parents are reasonable. It does not say if your parents understand what you're going through. It doesn't say that if you agree with them, or if you want to do it already. He makes a clear and hard, fast statement. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. For the children, I want you to understand your parents a little bit better. If you are tempted to think that your parents have no regard or no care for the consequences of their rules on your lives, you're simply wrong. Seeing it as one of your parents' main things is to teach you how to be the best person that you can be. Their rules and their guidelines are foremost in their minds of what impact it's going to have on your life. Now, it may not have the impact on your life that you want it to have, but being loving, caring parents who care for you deeply, their rules are there to guide you to the best of their ability in ways that you don't understand and cannot understand at your age. That's why here in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 and verse 2, Paul does not give them guidelines of obey your parents when you understand it or when you think that they're correct. It is a blanket statement of you do it because God expects your parents to have the best intention or their best intentions always concerning you. Just because you can't see the goal doesn't mean that it gives you the right to disobey. In fact, it should give you the opposite. Because you cannot see the goal, you should rely on their guidance to get you there. Our parents have traversed life and have left along a guide rope, so to speak, in the dark where we cannot see. It's a fool who takes his hand off the guide rope and says, I'm going to find my own way. Our parents are there to guide us along that way. In Galatians chapter 5, turn over Galatians chapter 5 in a second. If we ever feel that our parents don't understand what it's like to be young, I would like you to consider Orson Welles' words. Orson Welles is a famous science fiction author. He says, I know what it's like to be young, but you don't know what it's like to be old. For children, that may not make a whole lot of sense right now. I remember very distinctly what it's like to be my daughter's age and almost 9. I remember what it's like to be my son's age at 6. I remember what it was like to be 15 and 19 and 20 and 25 and 30. My children don't know what it's like to be 10, 12, 13, 16, 18 yet. They're going to get there, Lord willing. And for the children who are getting to that point where you feel that maybe your parents don't understand, they really do. And in those ages, they have distinct memories of what it was like to be those ages. And they want to help you through those ages. And by honoring them and obeying them, you will make it easier on yourself far more than I did. Here in Galatians chapter 5, he says, you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We as Christians are commanded to serve one another out of reverence for Christ and out of love for one another. And our parents are no exception. There are a variety of reasons our parents, as younger children, might ask us to run errands or to do chores or to do work around the house for them. And we should do it because God has commanded us to honor our parents. One of the great ways that we show honor is our words, it is through our obedience, and it's through our service for one another. We should be pleased that we have an ability to give something back to our parents after they do so much for us. And I know as children, you're not going to understand how much it is. As a parent, you'll find out just how much your parents really have done for you. Honor and service to our parents does not end when you graduate high school and you leave home. Ephesians chapter 6 does not put an age limit on our honoring of our parents. I mentioned before that all of us have something in common, whether of age or gender or race, and that's why we're all children of somebody. And being 30 or 50 or 65, as long as your parents are alive, you have the command there in Ephesians chapter 6 to be children who honor your parents. And one of the ways to do that is to serve them. Things that were easy in your 20s are a lot harder in your 30s. Things in your 40s that were possible become a lot less possible in your 60s. And things that were used to be common everyday occurrences in your life are nearly impossible at older ages. I have the wonderful example of my father and my uncle taking time every single week to travel over to my grandparents' house and mow the yard and to shovel the snow and to clean out the gutters, to deliver groceries when just simply driving to the grocery store was a huge burden at that point. Making sure the car was maintained and the tires were rotated. All those small things my grandfather would have done 100 times over if he were younger. And we as children have the ability to help, more so as age progresses, to help them in that service. And that's what Ephesians chapter 6 is a lot about, is honoring our parents with the service that we provide for them. And that goes for parents who are good parents and parents who are not good parents. There is no distinction made in Ephesians chapter 6 to honor your mother and father if they love God, or if they have been good to you, or if they continue to be nice older people. Our obedience to God is sometimes shown more in the cranky older people that we help out. We are commanded to love and to honor our parents at whatever age they are. And we sometimes forget, I know that Sarah and I have often talked about this, that as you grow older, you still feel young mentally, and yet you just can't do all the things you want to do physically. And there's a loss of dignity in that. Nobody wants to be dependent on somebody else. No one wants to call someone, can you come over and mow my yard? 2 years ago I could easily have done it, but now my knees hurt, my back hurts. Could you pick up groceries? How hard would that be to call someone up and ask them to pick up groceries for you? But we as children have the ability to show love in a way that we can help our parents and our grandparents grow old with dignity. To serve them in a way that does not demean them, but to exhort them as an older individual who we love and care for. Matthew chapter 15, we are our last point for this morning. In Matthew chapter 15, when it comes to honoring our parents, this is one of the very few times that this command from Deuteronomy is applied in a present-day sense. And it's not here for the young. Here in Matthew chapter 15, read with me there verses 4 down through verse 6. He says, "For God commands, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father and mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father or mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, you need not honor father and mother. And so for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God." Interestingly enough, the way that Jesus applies this passage in Matthew chapter 15 and verse 4 isn't applied to small children this time. It's applied to adults. And what he's saying here is that the command to honor father and mother has a financial aspect to it. What the Pharisees were doing at the time, where they were saying, you don't need to help your parents out financially. If you just simply give that to the temple, then that alleviates you from a financial responsibility to your parents. And Jesus makes the point there in verse 6 that by your traditions you have made void the word of God. So one of the very few direct examples that we have of how to apply the command to honor father and mother has a direct application to us as adults to continue to provide financially for our parents as the need arises. And we should consider that. I know in our modern day and time it is not our social custom to have the children provide financially for the parents. We expect parents to do that kind of throughout their working life, put away a 401k or another CDs or other financial things that I have no idea how they work. But we expect our parents to have done that so that whenever they become the age where they are going to retire or they're forced to retire, that they can take care of themselves financially and not be a burden to us as children. And that is not always the case. And nor is God commanded for us as adults to have that always worked out. What he says is, honor our father and mother. And part of that as an adult is to plan for the time where you are helping financially with your parents. And we should consider that as we grow older. And so, for a couple things we need to consider is, how do I honor father and mother? First one is to honor with your lips. Speak highly about them. Speak kindly to them. Hold them in reverence in the way that you talk to them and the way you talk about them. Honor them with your service. Take time to be willing to give back to the parents who have done so much already. For the children especially, to honor them with obedience, realizing the things they tell you to do now has a huge impact on who you will be in the future. And their guidance through those years will make all the difference. Honor them with your obedience. For us who are now getting older, and we have parents who are getting older, honor them with their service and honor them with our financial aid from time to time. Make sure that our parents are well taken care of. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 4 and in verse 8, Paul makes a point that if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household, and then make some return to their parents. For this is pleasing in the sight of God. In verse 8, but if anyone does not provide for his own relatives, and especially the members of his own household, he has denied the faith, and he is worse than an unbeliever. We need to remember those things as we consider what it means to honor our parents in whatever age that we or they are at. And we are blessed to still have parents. My challenge for you this week is to take some time out. Make sure that they understand what their impact in your life has meant. If you're older and you had the chance to call them up or to do something for them, then do that. If they're in weekly needs of service, then make sure that you're there to do that. If they're there needing financial assistance, make sure you do that and you plan for that as they grow older. If you are younger, take some time this week to ask yourself, how have I been speaking to my parents? And how do I speak about my parents around other individuals? We've been without electricity since Thursday evening, so no challenge cards this week, no computer, no printer. So we just have to remember the challenge this week without having a paper to go along with it. But take some time this week to really evaluate how well you've been doing in honoring your parents. The Song of Invitation is number 844. Jeff has picked out that song. We'll talk about that. We'll sing that song in just a moment. God has offered to become a father to us as we are children to him. Some of us maybe have grown up with mothers who are unreasonable, fathers who are absent. Maybe we have not grown up with parents hardly at all.